So now in our templating, let's start looking at generating full configs. So we're going to generate entire configuration files for the 4 Arista switches. So let's go ahead and look at this. In this case, it's actually 8 Arista switches, but here in a few minutes, we'll go to only what's in our inventory, which will just be the 4. Okay, so in this case, we're operating on localhost. We are going to print this out, which says generate Arista configs. Our source file is going to be this template, and I've actually just moved it into another directory to keep it separate from the tasks we did previously. Now here I have a for loop. Each time through the for loop, it's going to use the variables here, so the host name, an IP address, and then a secret. Go to the end, and we see that we do that for switch 1 through switch 8. If I go into the configs2 directory, I'm going to remove all the config files. Now let's look at our template, and our template is actually this Arista switch.j2. So we'll do Arista switch.j2, and then notice I just have a full config file. I have a certain variables, so here's my host name. Now since it's going through a for loop, we're going to have item.hostname, item.secret, and item.ip_address. So each time through the for loop, we're going to get one of these lists. We're going to get one of these list entries back to us. Each of those list entries is a dictionary. So item.hostname is going to correspond to this, item.ip_address is going to correspond to this, and item.eapi_secret is going to correspond to this encrypted string. And notice each one of them have a different password for eapi_secret. Let's go ahead and generate those configs. We can look at the configs2 directory. We see we've generated all those files. We can look at one of those files. We can see it has the right host name. We can see the secret has been generated. If we scroll down, we can see that it has the IP address. If we go to a different box like 8, we can see it has a different host name. It actually would have a different secret here, and it has a different IP address here. So we've used templating to generate full entire configurations, and later on we'll see how we can couple this with Napalm or potentially Ansible Core to push out the configs. In this case, since we are generating entire configs, it actually works better to push it out with Napalm. Now let's go ahead and look at a second version of this. So now I've converted this over to operate on not local or localhost, but instead to operate on the Arista group. Once again, I'm pulling a template. Now my template is this switch_2, and I'm going to generate the configs referenced here. Now notice I no longer have a for loop with items. I'm doing this based on what's in inventory, which is the Arista group. Now if I look at my second template, you can see it's very similar to what we had previously, except there's no item dot, it's just host name, EAPI secret, and then management IP address. Now where is all that information being pulled from? It's being pulled from inventory. So here's host name, management IP address, secret. And then similarly, if we looked at like switch 8, you can see we have those 3 variables. So let me go ahead and remove all these text files. So there's nothing in this directory. And let's go ahead and execute that playbook. Generate those configs, in which case this is just 4 configs. We can see we've generated them. We can see once again we're generating full configs. Host name, Here's my secret variable got populated. Here's my IP address got populated. And in general, I would say it's better to have these variables in inventory information than having them embedded in your playbook. It's a better practice to start migrating your data to be in inventory somewhere in your variable system and not have them just embedded inside your playbook. It'll make things more manageable in the long run. Now, if we expand on this and we look at the third version of this playbook, you can see we're doing a very similar pattern. We have hosts Arista, so we're operating on the Arista group, which is those 4 Arista switches. We're using this third template, and we're generating these output files. Let's look at this third template. Now let's see what's changed here. I've started to variabilize more things. I've added an NTP server. I've also converted this over to be a for loop. So as opposed to having all my interfaces blown out, fully expanded, I've just eliminated this repetition, and I'm doing Ethernet 2 through Ethernet 7. So here the 2 would be included, the 7 would be excluded. So this is going to give me Ethernet 2 through 7. I carved this one out separate because it had a slightly different configuration because it had the spanning tree port fast. I've also added a variable for the default gateway. So I'm moving things from being inside the template to being variables. So I'm making more things being variabilized in my inventory system, which hopefully in the long run makes the configuration template generation more reusable, that I can reuse it in different contexts. Now, where are some of these variables going to reside? They're going to reside in either all.yaml for things like the NTP server, or they might reside in some other group var. Obviously not in Cisco because we're working on Arista, but here you'll see where we're pulling those from. So we're not pulling them from group vars, we're actually pulling them from host vars. Here's our host name, here's our management IP address, here's our eAPI secret. Let's go back and look at this template again. Host name, so it's getting that from host vars. It's getting this from group vars in the all.yaml. It's getting this from the host vars. It's getting this from host vars, and I'd need to check where it's getting the default gateway from. Default gateway is actually coming from group vars. So we've basically moved all of those to be in our inventory system in some way. Now let's go ahead and execute this playbook and see what happens. Now a good sanity check here is this is generating the exact same configurations as our last step did. So that's telling me that I didn't change the configs at all when migrating between this template 2 and this template 3. So that's a good sanity check. Are our configs exactly what they were before? That's telling me my templating system, the format that I've constructed it, is exactly the same as it was previously. And let's go on to the next step in this process. So that is using the same template as we used in step 3, so that's not making any changes. Let me look at the next step in step 5. Okay, so let me go ahead and do one thing here. And the thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to update this to be template 4. And then let me go ahead and look at template 4. So template 4, I'm moving even farther in the direction of variabilizing things in my template. So I have host name, NTP server. But now look, I get down here and I actually have a section for my users that I'm installing on the system. So I'm going to have some list users. This list users is getting pulled from group bars and looks like this. I'll try to get rid of the line wrap and still have it be somewhat readable to you. So here's my users, 4 list elements, here's my variables, here are my 4 users. Some of them have a privilege, some of them have a role, they all have a secret. So then if I go back to my template, let me make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so if I go back into my template and we look at this for loop, so it loops over the users. Each time through the users, it stuffs this variable named user as one of those elements. And then here it checks if there's a user role. So if it has a user role, it does this action. If it doesn't have a user role, it goes on to the other elements. And then it checks, is there a privilege? Well, actually it checks if there's no privilege. So one of those had no privilege, it does this statement. The statement without the priv defined. And then for everything else, which in this case would have the username, the privilege, and the secret, it generates those. So that's basically handling the cases that I have in this output file. So if you look here at my users, one of them has a role. So we have to handle that in that if-else statement. One of them does not have a privilege, so we have to handle that case in that if-else. And then the other two follow this pattern, i.e. the username, privilege, and the secret pattern, and that covers these two. So basically those 3 cases are handled in that if-else statement. So we're basically just variabilizing and putting some conditionals and flow control to handle the variations that we see there. And so let's look at that template and see if there's anything else that's worth noting. Nope, that should be it. And let's go ahead and execute that playbook. So once again, we notice that we've generated our 4 Arista configs and they were unchanged. So we're generating those using the for loop that we specify in that template, and it's exactly the same as what we generated in the previous step of this. So we went through various patterns of generating entire configuration files using a templating system. In the next steps, we're going to start talking about how to use both Napalm and Ansible core modules to push these configurations, either partial configs or full configurations, to devices.